All right, let's dive right into this explainer and trace the truly astonishing journey of Dhirubhai Ambani. We're talking about a man who didn't just participate in Indian business, he completely redefined the entire landscape. Today, we're exploring the life of the ultimate underdog, someone who literally built a massive empire out of absolutely nothing. To really wrap your head around the scale of his achievement, just look at this massive number, 2 crore rupees. That represents the staggering wealth generated by his company, Reliance Industries, every single minute today. Just let that sink in for a second. Every 60 seconds, his creation generates what most people couldn't even dream of making in a lifetime. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Now, what's really wild here is the sheer contrast between where he ended up and where he actually started. On one side, you have an ordinary clerk standing out in the blazing sun for hours, filling vehicles with petrol, and on the other, India's most ambitious empire builder. Honestly, it sounds like a movie script, doesn't it? And so, that brings us to the core mystery we're unraveling in our explainer today. How on earth did he pull off this impossible underdog triumph? How does someone go from holding a gas nozzle in the sweltering heat to holding the reins of the largest company in India? Let's find out. Let's kick things off with Chapter 1, From Clerk to Empire Builder. So his story starts back in 1932 in a tiny 2-room house in the village of Chorwad, Gujarat. He was born into a poor schoolteacher's family of 7, all squeezing into those 2 rooms with barely enough money to get by. But he was driven by this intense hunger to succeed. At just 14, he's out there actively forming a student organization for the 1946 independence movement. But, with no family wealth or connections, he had to make a move. So at 16 years old, he boards a steamer and sails 2,400 kilometers to Aden, Yemen, where he lands a job as a clerk. And this is where we get a glimpse of his brilliant mind for spotting market inefficiencies. While in Aden, he noticed the local currency, the Yemeni rial, was actually made of silver. He realized, and this is genius, that if he bought a coin for its face value of, say, £10, he could literally melt it down and sell the pure silver in London for £12. It was an absolute masterclass in arbitrage. He made lakhs of rupees doing this before the authorities caught on and finally put a stop to it. Moving right along to Chapter 2, Sparking the Textile Revolution. Okay, so by 1958, he's back in India. He marries his wife Kokila-ben and starts Reliance Commercial Corporation with his cousin in a tiny 350-square-foot room in Bombay. We're talking 1 telephone, 1 table, 3 chairs. That's it. But the crucial turning point happened right here. He spotted this massive, untapped demand for synthetic threads in India, nylon, polyester, but imports were heavily restricted. Now, the government had these replenishment licenses, which basically let exporters import a small amount of thread. Dhirubhai noticed these exporters weren't even using them, so he swooped in, bought up those unused licenses at a premium, and brilliantly cornered the market. Now, as you can imagine, his extremely aggressive risk tolerance totally terrified his conservative cousin. In 1965, anticipating a massive price hike, Dhirubhai hoarded their thread inventory. When his cousin panicked and demanded they sell, Dhirubhai actually did sell, but to himself. As prices spiked weeks later, he made a fortune and eventually bought out his cousin's share of the entire partnership for 6 lakh rupees. But, he wasn't content just being a supplier. He pivoted straight into manufacturing. He bought some land in Baroda, started with just 4 knitting machines, and launched the iconic Only Vimal brand. He positioned it as a premium fabric, dropped a massive 1 crore annually on advertising, and used a Western-style franchise model to open up 400 shops. By 1979, the guy who started with a single desk was running India's largest textile producer. Which leads us to Chapter 3, The Stock Market Wars. The Indian stock market was the real battleground where he became a total legend, earning the title of the Messiah of small investors. In 1977, he essentially democratized wealth generation in India with the Reliance IPO. Before this, only wealthy elites played the market, but Dhirubhai targeted the Indian middle class, offering shares at just 10 rupees. It was oversubscribed 7 times over. The share price multiplied 5 times in just a few months, making regular, everyday people rich. But of course, massive success breeds powerful enemies. In 1982, a Kolkata-based bear cartel launched a full-scale attack on Reliance using a notoriously tricky maneuver called short selling. Basically, they borrowed shares and sold them en masse to trigger panic and crash the price. Their whole plan was to buy them back cheap, return them, and pocket the difference. and this built into one of the greatest defensive masterstrokes in financial history. Instead of the stock crashing, it got caught in the ultimate bear trap. A mysterious group of West Asian buyers, allegedly backed by Ambani himself, just absorbed the entire 3.5 lakh share sell-off. They just kept buying. The price absolutely rocketed to 201 rupees, bankrupting the bear cartel and cementing Reliance as the market's most popular stock. No way were they taking him down. All right, let's look at Chapter 4, Battles, Bureaucracy, and Setbacks. So we're in the era of the license Raj in the 70s and 80s. Navigating the political bureaucracy and fighting aggressive competitors was literally just as critical as running the manufacturing lines. We're looking at this impartially here. It was a fierce corporate war. He had an intense rivalry with Nusli Wadia of Bombay Dyeing. Competitors found their licenses mysteriously blocked, which led to negative media campaigns by journalists known as the Dirty Dozen, and serious retaliation from Ramnath Goenka of the Indian Express. It was incredibly turbulent, eventually leading to a full CBI inquiry and massive excise notices against Reliance. As you'd expect, the sheer, prolonged stress of these intense business wars took a devastating physical toll. In 1986, Dhirubhai suffered a massive stroke. He fought for his life in a U.S. hospital for weeks, and when he finally returned, his right side was completely paralyzed. But incredibly, and this shows his sheer willpower, people noticed that while his body was slowed, the fire in his eyes and his sharp mind remained completely untouched. He jumped right back in to focus on his ultimate vision. Let's dive into the climax of his strategy. Chapter 5. The Ultimate Refinery Dream. To get absolute control and cut out all reliance on external suppliers, he used this brilliant strategy called complete backward integration. He systematically worked backwards. He started with the final product, Vimal textiles. Then he built plants to make the polyester threads himself. Then he built the petrochemical plants needed for the threads. The final, massive piece of the puzzle, building a refinery to process the raw crude oil. But just before that final dream could be realized, absolute disaster struck. A catastrophic monsoon flood completely submerged his Padalganga polyester plant. We're talking hundreds of crores in machinery literally underwater. It looked like the dream was dead. Yet, the Ambani resilience kicked in. Led by his son Mukesh, an army of workers dismantled, cleaned, and restarted that entire massive facility in just 4 weeks. It was pretty miraculous, honestly. Overcoming that massive hurdle, his vision culminated in his crowning achievement, the Jamnagar oil refinery in 1993. This was a $6 billion private industrial investment. Completed in just 3 years, it was designed to refine an astonishing 25% of India's entire crude oil supply. And get this, by 2001, it was actually operating at 107% capacity. His lifelong dream of total backward integration was finally complete. Now, here's a surprising, kind of beautiful fact to put the sheer scale of this project into perspective. Because the refinery was built in a barren desert region, Dhirubhai decided to completely transform the landscape. He had over 100,000 mango trees planted around the site. He literally turned a desert green, breaking a historical record that was previously held by the Mughal Emperor Akbar. Just incredible. In April 2002, celebrating the creation of a true global energy company, he shared these powerful final words with his shareholders. Our dreams must be bigger, our ambitions higher, our commitment deeper, and our efforts greater. Tragically, just a few months later, he suffered another stroke and passed away, leaving behind a legacy that is simply unparalleled. So, what's the big takeaway from this explainer? It really comes down to the sheer power of unwavering ambition. From a petrol clerk melting silver coins to the architect of India's largest company, his journey is an absolute masterclass in business. And it leaves us with a provocative thought. Looking at the steps of his ascent, how are you going to harness that exact same underdog spirit, that futuristic thinking, and that aggressive risk-taking to build your own ambitions? Something to think about. Until next time, keep learning, keep analyzing, and keep building.